All right, we are here at week 3 of our Last Man Standing challenge. Last week, Justin was eliminated in the woodcutting competition. Today's challenge involves guns. Not these ones, though. We're gonna shoot at these cans. Person who hits the least, eliminated.
My name is Nick, and I am not the last man standing.
I think what you can learn from that lesson or that video is if you want to rob any of our houses, you will be fine. There is no way we're going to be able to shoot you. But I do just want to say you're looking at one of the finalists in the Last Man Standing competition. Thank you very much. And also now, I don't have the spiritual gift of prophecy, but I will just go out on a limb and say you're also looking at the champion because, Dave, I know you're watching. There's no way I'm going to let you, old man grandpa, beat me in that final challenge. So definitely come out next week. We're going to be crowning the victor. We haven't even filmed that challenge yet, so it really is up in the air for me to kick Dave's butt. So anyway, I want to welcome all of you here today. I want to welcome those of you watching online from wherever you might be in the state or in the country. Also, I want to say a special welcome to those of you in Isani, my crowd, my people. I miss you guys. I'll see you next week. Hopefully, I'll see you at the parade today, and I hope Billy's treating you well. So give him a hard time if he doesn't. Anyway, welcome to those of you here in North Branch. If you're newer to the church, my name is Shaheen. I am the campus pastor of our second location in Isani, and this is hard for me to believe, but it's been over 6 months since I've been in a weekend service here at this site. So I just feel super honored and blessed to be with all of you this morning. We are in the middle of a series called Last Man Standing. And what we're doing during this series is kind of the question that we're asking, or the premise that we're going from is, what does it mean to be a man? What is it that makes a man a man? Like, are there certain characteristics or traits or roles or qualities that we can look to that would help us distinguish between a man and a woman? And the reason that we're talking about this is because culturally there seems to be a blending of the genders. We're becoming more and more a genderless society. We see it in fashion and appearance that, there used to be, this is men's clothing and this is women's clothing. And granted, we are much more sheltered here in the suburbs of the upper Midwest, but the trend is definitely heading that way where there's not really a men's or a women's clothing. It's just, this is clothing. It's becoming a blurring of the genders. We see the same sort of thing in jobs and career paths and different, routes that people take with their lives. Used to be, this was a man's job, this was a woman's job. Now, not that one way is right or wrong. That's not the point. Just the fact that today, they're starting to blend together. We see it in sports, in hobbies, and activities. I've even seen, sports where men and women play at the same time. There is a blurring of the two genders in our culture today. And really, I think this has come about out of a push for equality between the genders, which is a good thing. It's healthy for us. Men and women are created equally. We're equal in value. We're equal in intelligence. We're equal in worth, we are equal in the eyes of God. But out of this push for equality between the genders, I think that we've kind of lost something special and sacred in the process, and that is that we're losing the uniqueness of each gender. We're losing what makes a man or what makes a woman special. And we covered this in the first week of this series, if you were here, but this kind of overarching principle that even though as men and women we are equal, we are not the same. Men and women are equal, but our roles are different. The way that God designed us is different. Now, that is hard for us to maybe understand or to try and grasp in today's culture, that we would have different roles, but that's what we want to look at during this series, is what does the Bible say about our roles as men? What does God have to say about this matter? Now, the ideas and the topics that we're covering, I want to let you know, are not my opinion. They're not Pastor Kevin's opinions. We're not trying to relive the glory days, whatever those might be. These ideas are certainly not culturally on point, but we want to discover, how did God create us as men? What is God's stance on the matter in the roles between the two genders, looking at men specifically? So last week, what we did, we started off, and Pastor Kevin talked about one of the things that defines us as men is that we are to love our wives as Christ loved the church. To love them with, not a fleeting, emotional type of feel-good love. I mean, that's certainly part of it, but to love them like Christ loved the church. Not to just love our wives or our girlfriends when they do things right or when they do things for us, but to love them, to understand them, to care about them, to know the intricacies of their personality and their fears or their worries or what makes them tick. And at the end of that message, Pastor Kevin gave us guys a challenge to find out our wife's love language. What are the 5 love languages? And I hope you took up that challenge to either discover what it was if you're a little sneaky, or just flat out ask if you need to. What is your wife, your girlfriend's love language? I hope you took up that challenge. If you didn't, do it this week. Don't let it slip on by. We grow when we apply what we learn. So if you haven't done it, do it this week. If you missed last week's message, you can always check it out online. Now, the topic that we're going to talk about today, though, has got to be one of the most controversial topics in the Bible. There has been so much discussion and debate over this idea from Christians and non-Christians, both. It's one of the hardest things for us as people, men and women, to wrap our minds around and to really understand how this plays out, what it means in our lives. When we start talking about it, you might feel like you want to just kick back a little bit. You might feel like, I don't know if I can agree or if I can buy into this. And I just want you to know that if you feel that way, that if at the end of the message you just feel upset inside, you feel like you can't buy into this, you feel maybe offended that the Bible would suggest something like this, I just want you to know you can feel free to send me your angry emails at Kevin@Access Church Online, and I would just love to read those. So anyway, thanks, Kevin. No, but in all seriousness, it is my hope today that even though this is going to be challenging, even though it might kind of seem unnatural or weird, it's my hope that we can just, at the very minimum, for the next 20 minutes together, just kind of let down our guards and at least look at what God has to say before we make any decisions or any conclusions. And so, men, this is one of the ways in which God has designed us, one of the ways in which He has set us apart from women, one of the ways in which He differentiates between the two genders is this. For the husband is the head of the wife. So see you next week. I told you, this is going to be a little bit of a hard one. The husband is the head of the wife. One of the ways in which God has designed us as men is to be the head or the leader in a marriage or in a family. There's no co-leaders. There's not a popular vote. There's not a household electoral college or anything like that. God has designed us on purpose with a plan for us men to be the head or to be the leaders. I think sometimes when we look at leadership in the home, sometimes we base that off of intelligence. Whoever's the smarter person, they get to be the leader. Maybe it's generally smarter. If you know more about this area, then you get to be the leader. But that's not what God teaches. That's not how God designed things. Sometimes when we look at leadership in the home, we assign it based off of who says something first, or who initiates this, or who notices a problem first, and then they are the leader of that situation. That's not what God teaches. That's not what the scriptures say. Far too often, unfortunately, I think leadership in the home is based off of who yells the loudest, or who complains the most, or who belittles the other person the best. But that is not what God says. That's not what God designed. When God is looking at a marriage or at a household, a family unit, he only looks at one criteria for leadership: gender. Gender. I know that might seem wrong, it might seem unnatural, it might seem unfair, because it is unfair. Like, I'll give you that one. It seems like a very sexist thing to say in 2015, but that is exactly how God has designed things. Now, I just got to tell you, ladies, this is no slight against you at all, against your skills, against your abilities, against even your ability to lead in other situations. You can be great at it, but within the confines of a marriage relationship, or within the confines of a home, God gives leadership to the men. So let's just take a break for a minute, take a little pause. What comes to your mind when you hear that? Like, what pops into your head? What emotions do you feel when we talk about leadership or talk about men being the head? That's their God-given role. What do you feel inside? What do you picture? Does leadership mean that it's my way or the highway? Is leadership that the guy makes the decision every time, every situation, no matter what, just all the time? Is that leadership? I mean, think about your past experiences growing up, maybe different jobs that you've had. What do you feel inside when you hear, that the man is the head or a man is the leader? Maybe for you, you had a father who wasn't around very much when you were growing up, or maybe if he was, all he did was boss you around. Is that what it means? Maybe you had a leader at a job who, did none of the work but took all of the credit. Is that right? Is that what we're supposed to base our minds off of? Maybe when you think of leader or head, you think of like a dictator type person who uses fear and manipulation to get your way. I mean, I don't know. We have so many different experiences and lives represented at both of our sites. I think we probably span the entire gamut of what leadership could look like and what emotions we feel because of it. But God clears things up for us. God tells us what he means when he gives men this role, this design. And this verse goes on to say this: for the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Last week, men, it was love like Jesus loved. And this week, it's the exact same thing. Lead as Jesus led. Not lead like we want to, but lead like Jesus led. And I think there's a whole school of thought out there. There's even some theologians that believe that, this teaching is no longer relevant or applicable today. This is just a cultural principle written a long time ago. But I just want to let you know that I don't buy into that school of thought. I don't think that's a proper way to interpret the Bible because of this. Because he references as Christ is the head of the church. And Jesus is still the head of the church today like he was 2,000 years ago when this was written. And so if that foundational kind of bedrock principle is the same, then this preceding application about marriage roles is also the same. We are to lead as Jesus led the church. Men, guys. So, I think that brings up the obvious question, right? How in the world did Jesus lead the church? If that's supposed to be our example, guys, of what we're supposed to do in our homes and in our marriages, then what does that look like? How did Jesus lead the church? And all throughout the Gospels, which are the first four books in the New Testament, they're 4 different accounts of Jesus' life, we see numerous examples of how Jesus led the church, far more than we could cover today. We're not even going to read any verses just because it would get too long. But what I want to do is I just kind of want to talk through some of the ways in which Jesus led so that we can start to wrap our minds around what this means, so we can start to understand it, both men and women, what this type of headship or leadership means. And so one of the ways that Jesus was a great leader was that he was a great teacher. Every good leader knows that it's part of their responsibility to teach people in their care, to teach people that they're responsible for what they know, their experiences, maybe some of their mistakes. And Jesus was a fantastic teacher. Jesus taught big crowds with, things called parables or stories with a point. He would use them to teach people about the kingdom of God or about maybe how to act or behave or respond in certain situations. Jesus would teach in smaller group settings. Maybe he would take his disciples, kind of off after one of these bigger teachings and further explain what he meant, or he would answer some of their questions, or he would teach them how they can apply the lessons to their lives. Jesus taught people in one-on-one situations where he would explain maybe his character or God's character, what his purpose on this earth was for. And Jesus even tried to teach some of his enemies and people who were against him. They were called Pharisees. He would try and teach them through, shocking statements or these bold predictions he would throw out. Jesus was keenly aware of every opportunity he had to teach people. Jesus also led the church by setting direction for the church. He laid out the church's path, the course it would take, what its distinctives would be, what the morals and values would be of the church. The Sermon on the Mount, if you're familiar with that, is a great example of this, where Jesus set direction, that people or culture, the world around you, could act however they want. But the church, his church, was going to be merciful, was going to be humble, was going to forgive, love their enemies. He talked about sins like adultery and hate. He talked about being generous or prayer. He laid out this is what I want my church to stand for. Jesus gave direction in other ways too. There were a couple times when he would send his disciples or his followers out on these short little missionary journeys. And one time he sends them out and he says, okay, I want you to go, but don't take any food, don't take any extra clothes, don't plan where you're going to go, don't take a sword, nothing. Just go out, do your thing. And they come back, oh, cool, look at all the stuff that happened. And Jesus sends them out again, but with different direction, using leadership a different way. And he says, okay, when you go out this time, remember last time I told you don't take anything? Well, this is the new direction. Take food, take clothes, plan where you're going to stay, take a sword in case you need it. This is my direction. Probably one of the most famous examples of Jesus' direction happened right before he left this earth and ascended into heaven. And he gathered his disciples together, his followers, and he gave them something that we call the Great Commission. And basically he said, guys, church, this is what I want you to do. I want you to go out into all the world, spread the news about me, reach people for God, make more disciples, make more followers. Jesus led the church through his correction and discipline that he had to do sometimes. One time, the disciple Peter, same Peter that walked on water, Peter made this statement, and Jesus, knowing that it was false and couldn't just let it go, he turns around and he looks at Peter and he says, "Get behind me, Satan." He literally called Peter Satan. Now, hey, I don't know what types of friends you guys have, but man, if one of my friends called me Satan, to my face in all seriousness, I don't think we'd be friends much longer. That's got to hurt. I'm sure Jesus and Peter were great friends. Jesus loved him like a brother, but Jesus knew that part of his leadership responsibility was to correct and discipline when needed. I think maybe just one final overarching thing we can learn about Jesus' life and his leadership to the church is that he ultimately owned up to the outcome of everything that happened in his ministry. In John chapter 17, we have an account of Jesus' prayer the night before he was arrested. He's going to be arrested, go to trial, be crucified in less than 24 hours. And so he is there praying to his heavenly Father, and I'm sure his mind is racing a million miles a minute. He's got thoughts all over the place, probably, but never once do we see Jesus blaming somebody else. Never once do we see Jesus kind of, passing the buck or trying to skirt his responsibility. We never once see Jesus' attitude start to, turn or get sour when things are about to go really, really bad for him. Like, Jesus owned up to the outcome of his ministry. And if you read that chapter later on, John 17, you'll discover that as Jesus is praying, he says things like, Father, I did what you asked me to. I completed the mission that you gave me. I look after the guys you gave me. I protected them. I haven't lost one. I taught them everything I could. They're prepared for you, God. You gave me this mission, and I fulfilled it. I did everything I could to lead these people like you asked me to. Men, Jesus is our example of how we are to lead in our homes, in our marriages, and in our families. J. Oswald Sanders was an author. He's not alive anymore, but he was an author, and he was a consulting director for this group called the Overseas Missionary Fellowship. And he wrote a book appropriately titled Spiritual Leadership. And in that book, he gives kind of like a one-sentence overarching statement for this is what leadership would look like that I want to read to you this morning. He writes this: a true leader is concerned primarily with the welfare of others, not with his own comfort or prestige. And Jesus exemplified this perfectly. He was always concerned about the welfare of others, not that he, any title or any comfort that he could have. And guys, I don't know if when we started talking about this, you kind of, this is a good week for me to be here, right? Give the wife a little nudge or something. You thought, head of the home. I get to, rule with an iron scepter. I get to get things done my way. Everybody serve me. Listen, that's not the type of leadership that I'm talking about. That's not the type of leadership that the Bible teaches. And ladies, maybe your heart sunk or you instantly wanted to kick back. Like, nope, I can't buy into this. That's not the type of leadership that we're talking about. Men, being a leader is just as much a calling on our lives as it is a title that we have. If we go back to that Ephesians verse, the husband is the head of the wife as Christ is the head of the church. I think for me, if there was kind of one word to sum this up, if there was one word that could capture the intent or the meaning of this verse, of what God is trying to get across to us as guys about how to lead, this is what I think that word would be. The one that works for me is responsibility. Guys, God has called us men to be the head, to be the leader, to be responsible for our wives, for our kids, and for our families. Nowhere else in the Bible will you read something like this for women. It's an attribute, it's a role that God has given specifically to us as men. And if I could just take a quick little tangent here, just give a little premarital advice. If any of you are, engaged or dating, or maybe you just want to be married someday, listen up. Guys, when you are looking for that girl to marry, more important than how well you get along, more important than if her family likes you, more important than, if you enjoy the same hobbies or anything like that, more important is this. Do you believe, guys, in your heart of hearts, do you believe that she can follow where you are going to lead? And ladies, the same thing. When you're looking for that guy, when you start asking yourself, could he be the one? More important than his job or his financial situation, more important than if, like me, he has six-pack abs and amazing guitar skills, okay? That's number 2. But number 1 is this, ladies. Ladies, can you follow where he is going to lead? Can you respect his God-given leadership? Do you believe in his character and his judgment and his decision-making ability to lead you and your family into a fulfilling and blessed life? I'm telling you, if we neglect this principle, it will cause problems down the road. Now, following this doesn't mean that you won't have problems. Like, that's not it. We all have issues. But if we neglect it, guarantees that there will be. God has a design, and he has it on purpose. So, guys, let's ask ourselves some Dr. Phil questions, okay? You all know Dr. Phil. How's it working for us? How are we doing at leading? How are we doing at leading our wives or leading our families as Christ led the church? You know, sometimes I'll hear in passing from women, they'll say things like, I wish my husband was the financial leader of the home, or I wish my husband would take the lead in this role, or a popular one around church world is, I wish my husband was the spiritual leader of the home. Ladies, he is. Guys, we are. Like, we can't skirt that responsibility. Now, we can be good or bad leaders, like that's certainly up for discussion, but the role is still ours. So how are we doing at it? I mean, these are questions that I've had to ask myself all week as I was preparing for this message. Man, how am I really doing at leading my family, leading my wife like God has called me to? How are we doing at teaching? Do we play an active role in teaching our families the things that we want them to know and to learn? Do we help teach our kids the skills and abilities that they need to know for the next grade or maybe the next school or when they become an adult and go out and get a job? Are we teaching? Men, are we looking for opportunities to teach our families and share, maybe some of our life experience or wisdom that we have or mistakes that we've made and watch out for this? I mean, teaching isn't solely our responsibility. We don't have to be the only teacher, but we certainly can't let it go to the side either because, well, I'm not good at it, or my wife takes care of the teaching thing. No, that's part of what God requires of our headship, of our leadership. How are we doing at it? Guys, how are we doing at direction setting for our families? Do we have a plan? Do we have goals? Do we have dreams? Do we have desires for what we want our marriage to look like in 5 years, or what we want our family to accomplish in the next 10 years? I mean, do we have those types of things in our head? Are we taking time to set direction for our family on the morals and right and wrong, and this is how we are going to be as a family? If you were here the first week of the message, Pastor Kevin shared a story about his dad when they worked together in the stucco business. And all the other crews at the end of the day would leave and just leave their tools and junk out everywhere. Kevin would ask his dad, well, Dad, why can't we do this? And his dad, knowing his leadership role to set direction for his family, would say, no, we're going to clean up because we're Hasseltines, because it's what we do. Guys, how are we doing at that? Do we even do stuff like that? I mean, do I do stuff like that? What about when it comes to decision making? Guys, maybe there's a certain decision that, it's a job or a move or, enrolling your kids in a new school or a big purchase or something. If in your heart of hearts you believe that this is not a good move for your family, this is not a good decision to make, this is not the way we should head, then are we willing to stay the course and stand up for what we believe in and lead our families? Or the reverse is true too. I mean, if you think something does need to change, or you do need to move or get a new job or whatever it is, regardless of if it's popular or not, regardless of if it might cause, some tension or even a fight in the home, men, God has called us to be the leaders and head. Are we willing to do that? What about when we talk about correction or discipline in the home? Now, this certainly has to look different depending on who you're dealing with, okay? But what if somebody in our family or somebody that we're responsible for maybe starts working against where we're trying to lead, or maybe starts believing something or following someone that isn't true, or is just plain old making unwise choices? Are we going to correct it? Are we going to discipline it? Or just leave it go because it might upset the apple cart? Now, this is certainly not a permission slip to start running a concentration camp, okay? Don't get the wrong idea. Correction and discipline needs to come out of love and a concern, a welfare for others. But sometimes, men, being leaders, knowing what's best for others, means that has to happen. What about what types of discipline are going to work in the home. I know it's very, very popular today for moms to do, read all the books and the blogs and do the research and talk to other parents. But guys, it's up to us to decide upon what's going to be used. Now, if your wife read a bunch of books and a bunch of blogs and talked to a lot of people, man, you better honor her work, okay? Get her input, get her advice, talk to her about it. Like, leadership doesn't mean making decisions in a vacuum, okay? But ultimately, biblically speaking, God holds us as men responsible for what happens in the home. And if you're a follower of Christ today, if that's you, this leadership thing goes even further, that we are the spiritual leader of our homes. So men, are we setting the precedent for prayer? And if we kind of put a stake in the ground that we're going to read the Bible or worship God together? Men, are we generous towards the work of God with our time and money? And do we explain the importance of that to our families? Like, do we bring our families to church, or do our families kind of have to drag us there? Do we talk about God? Do we talk about his principles? Do we talk about what he's doing in our life? Or do we just leave that God stuff to the women and the kids? I mean, men, who is really going to be like the last man standing? That's what we're talking about. Who's going to carry this mantle of leadership that God has given us? I want to read something interesting to you. Way back at the beginning of the world, the creation account in Genesis, God created everything. We're familiar with the story. He created the heavens and the earth and all the trees and animals, and he created us men and women, and he put us in the Garden of Eden. He said, you can do anything, take care of the garden, take care of each other, do whatever you want, except for this one thing. Don't eat the fruit from this one tree. Anything else, you'll be good to go. Just don't do that. And what happens? Eve eats the fruit, right? And us guys, man, we have loved to use this to rail against women, probably since it happened, like, oh yeah, Eve did it. It's the woman's fault the world's gone down the tube. It's all the woman. Blame the woman. It's all her fault. This is like our stronghold, guys. Yeah, it's all Eve's fault. But that's not how God sees it. Genesis chapter 3, verse 9 says this, "But the Lord God called to the man, 'Where are you?'" Right after they both ate the fruit, God called out to the man and said, "Where are you?" Eve may have eaten the fruit first. Eve may have sinned first, but it was Adam that God was looking to for an explanation. I think if there was a scale of, worse sins, that day, Adam would have definitely committed the worst sin, that he missed his role as a man. I think I want to go back to that Ephesians verse, but in a different translation here. And this is just something that has encouraged me this week as I was reading. If we can go there. "For God has given husbands a sacred duty to lead." When I read this verse this week, it was equal parts humbling and almost overwhelming, and equal parts encouraging that God would choose me, that God would choose us as men for a sacred duty in all of our imperfections, in all of our flaws, and all of our shortcomings, and knowing that we're never going to be able to do it as good as Jesus. He still chose us for a sacred duty to lead and gave us a huge responsibility. Now, I don't know about you, but when it carries that much weight, I want to do the very best I can at it. Like, this is not something that I just want to let slide because it's hard or it's uncomfortable or it's not popular today. I want to become the man that God has created me to be, and I want to be the leader that he has designed me and called me to be. I mean, don't you? Don't you? We'll never be perfect at it. We'll always make mistakes. But can we commit to ourselves and to God that we're at least going to move that direction? Even if it's only one step at a time, one day at a time. Can we move that way? Normally, this is where we'd hand it off over in Isani for Billy to come up and pray for you, but I want to take an opportunity and pray for all of us guys at both locations here. And so if I could just have everybody bow their heads out of respect. If that's you today, if you if you want to move towards the calling that God has given you, if you want to become a better leader, a better head of your home, then would you just pray with me in your heart as I talk to God? Father, I thank you for your perfect design, your perfect will, and your perfect plan. God, I thank you for creating two different genders, for creating us men and creating women. Lord, it's such a beautiful thing that you have done. And God, as we talk about the roles and responsibilities that you've given us as men, Father, I want to be the type of man that you called me to be. I want to be the type of leader that Jesus was for my wife and for my kids. And so, God, I ask you today that you would help me and help every other man here to follow the example that Jesus taught. God, help us to be concerned primarily with the welfare of our families as we lead, not about, positions or titles or power, but about leading them into all that you have. God, use us as your designed leaders in the family. Use us, God. We give you permission to mold us, to shape us, to work in our lives, to challenge us when we need it, to inspire us and encourage us when we need it. God, we are telling you this morning, work in us. We want to be who you created us to be. In Jesus' name, amen.